Welcome to Toksave, Culture Talks, the podcast of PARADISEC, the Pacific and Regional Archive for digital sources in endangered cultures. I'm Jodie Kell.
And I'm Steven Gagau. These are conversations with people who have personal and cultural connections to the languages and music in our archive.
This episode follows on from the discussion we had in the previous episode with Sydney University ethnomusicologist Michael Webb concerning the recordings he made during his PhD research in Rabaul in 1993. If you have already listened to Rabaul, PNG, the Tolai and the researcher, you will be aware that my co-presenter, Steven Gagau, has a personal and cultural connection to Michael's recordings as a Tolai man from East New Britain. We suggest you listen to the previous episode as it covers the history of the region and its music, as well as how the recordings in the collection MW6 came about.
For this episode, I chose excerpts that cover the range and types of music in the extensive MW6 collection from the categories of traditional, choral or choir, string bands, and contemporary music. You can hear these excerpts as Michael and I discuss how they reconnect the history and evolution of music culture of Rabaul in the province of East New Britain, Papua New Guinea.
The conversation arising from the excerpts moves between a kind of musical quiz and an emotional journey as Michael hears the recordings for the first time in 25 years. I was struck by the way the music evokes the memories of both Michael and Steven as they share their insights into the history of the Rabaul region and how music is central to the expression of Tolai identity. This is like a quiz for you.
No, I just wanted to put it out just to get you to hear it.
Because it felt like a one of those blindfold tests where you have to sort of.
I just say just
That's
play
not
them.
really what we're doing.
Yeah, I just say just play them. So that's Tapialai.
Yeah.
Tapialai. So I think this performance, from what I can remember, was at one of those mass events where there's different dances going on at the same time,
Correct.
sort of next to each other.
Correct.
Tapialai
Tubuan
songs.
Yeah. It's a Tubuan mask. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Can you
all.
describe that?
It's a mask.
It's a full body mask. Right?
Full body mask, a conical mask that comes down. And I was explaining that there are two types. The Tubuan is the one with the eyes, and it's really the symbol of a female. Because we are matrilineal, that's the foundation of the Tubuan society. Then you have the Duk-Duk, which doesn't have eyes, and they can complement each other. But this Duk-Duk is a male, but the son of the Tumbuan actually in the chain. So the mainstay is the Tumbuan, and these songs are, depending on the ceremonies that. But this is from a matamatam, meaning we honor the
funeral.
Dead, a funeral, and we honor the dead. And
one of the things that intrigued me about that kind of singing is that there's no breath.
Yeah.
I mean, so people are breathing, but there are no rests in the tune.
Yeah, right.
So the tunes just go over and over, and it's sort of, so there's a group of men singing, and they cover quite a range, and they're in that sort of, the vocal projection is quite strident. The vocal style involves sort of breathing a little, singing a little bit on the inhale. So when you're getting to a point where you've run out of air, you inhale as you sing, and then you sort of, a bit like playing a didgeridoo in a certain kind of sense, in that you're inhaling at the same time as you're singing.
Yes.
So you're singing more or less backwards, you might say. So you'll hear the drumming. I'm hearing the kudu only.
Kudu,
right?
yeah. There's tidir.
Tidir, okay.
Tidir or pakupak, but
Yeah.
this one is mostly.
So the tidir is a small bamboo idiophone, and the
Yeah.
pakupak is like a small bamboo slit drum.
That's right. Yeah.
And the kudu is the Gunantuna language name for the drum, the hand drum, the sort of cylindrical.
Yes.
Also, the Tolai play the kudu in a different way from anyone else. Maybe the New Islanders play it the same way, but it's sort of what you might call upside down. So the open end of the drum goes over the shoulder, more or less, and so you're playing it like that because the drummer's sitting down. Whereas on the mainland, most of the drummers almost always dancing at the same time.
Dance at the same time. We have singers and we have the dancers.
Yeah, okay.
So an orchestra kind of.
Yeah, that's how we set up.
And it's in this case the instrumentalists, the drummers, will be men.
Yes.
And the women are the dancers and singers. So the singers are dancing and the dancers are singing, you might say, but the drummers are sitting down. It's very important that you really aesthetically engage the audience, because that gives the performance its power.
The power comes from the engagement. So and you see that it's always in formats of lines that there's a pattern. So if you read the pattern, the back two will always either go up to the front, and there's a so you see it to understand.
I haven't looked at this video, but I mean, there's either two rows of two or rows of four or six, and so on.
Depends on the rows. This one's a row of
Is
four.
it?
So
and people pair off and then go in the back again.
It's a bigger dance. A smaller dance would be a rows of twos.
Yeah.
So.
And they'll have dance wands or little dance objects, and that and
their headdress.
Come on. So those will have significance, and also the paint. That's all together, everything. The whole ensemble, including the rhythm of the drums and the songs and the lyrics and whatnot, all tell a story, and you have to know all of them to be able to get something.
Yes.
I was getting pretty emotional when I was hearing that, because I think that was at a rehearsal. I think this is Tolop's choir at Vunaroto.
Correct.
Yeah. He had one of the best choirs on the Gazelle. He was a long-term choir master. If he's still alive, he'd be well into his 80s now.
Yes.
And
that's where I wanted to pick up some loose ends, because sometimes I'm away and sometimes I'm not sure.
Yeah, it'd be great for him to hear these recordings.
Yeah, and this is where he's one of our icons.
Yeah, he was a great friend to me as well.
Yeah.
Tolop, lovely man, and his wife as well. So he invited me up to a church service, and this was practicing before George Brown Day in 1993. George Brown's the great missionary celebrated by a memorial choral day every year. That marks the year of his arrival in 1875. But his arrangements they're interesting. So you first hear the women singing before the men even come in, and not being able to see the choir, you think it's a women's choir, because they have women's choirs and men's choirs, but they also have mixed choirs. And then he has the men come flying in, and then the second verse, the men take off. So he was always doing tricky things with his arrangements, just a little bit different, just to get that edge to be the best choir, and of course he had the skill as well. And also you can hear incredible power and energy in the singing. I mean, that's, in my estimation, that's a sort of a transfer over of the kind of energy that comes from the singing of traditional dance songs over into hymnody. So you get the same kind of the music serves a related sort of ontological function. You're singing yourselves together, just as in dancing and singing, you're performing yourselves together.
Well, just to for a contrast on this, one of his other great competitors or best friend too is Andrew Midian, and but I just wanted to compare the singing techniques.
Okay, so
was that
Nanga or
Yes,
Bunurul? In his village, it sounds like it's inside. Would have been also rehearsing for George.
It's a rehearsal.
He was a fantastic conductor. So Midian was younger than me. Unfortunately, he died due to cancer in 2004. He was a brilliant musician, also a qualified pastor in the United Church. When I met him, he was at Vunaulul, serving as a pastor there, but he'd been in different places, and after I left, he went to the UK and in Manchester for a few years, I think 3 years he was a pastor there. Yeah, he moved around, but very musical guy, excellent guitarist as well. In a sense, you can tell some of the differences between the way he trains a choir and the way Tolop does. Of course, Tolop's got a lot more people in the choir that we heard there, whereas the men's group I think is going to be a bit smaller. But even so, you can hear some more mature voices in male voices. Some of the older men I can hear in there, and then whoever's doing the sort of falsetto parts, they're incredibly, like the pitch is fantastic. But with Tolops, he keeps the energy coming flat out, and the phrases are clipped at the end. Whereas in Andrew Midian's, the phrases are all tapered. There's a sort of bit more of rubato, kind of like a sense of taking each phrase as a piece of music in itself, as part of the greater whole. Interesting, women singing with the children in head voice, right up high. Boy, that's a pure line as well. Regina Tade's choir, she was a fascinating woman. She was Roman Catholic.
Yeah.
And with the OLSH mission, so Our Lady of Sacred Heart, she was the first Catholic woman conductor in the 1950s. So she became dedicated to kind of teaching and working with children's choirs. And when she was a young girl, she was in a choir that won the choral competition. So from 1947 through at least to the early 1960s, there were these huge Rabaul choral competitions. In my thinking, from what I can tell from the evidence, they were started by the Australian colonial government after World War II as a kind of a distraction to sort of bring people together, but it's also to distract them from politics, because a lot of the Tolai people were quite restless by the late 40s and 50s about moving from Australian to Japanese to Australian,
Germans to
German to Australian to Japanese to Australian, and they were basically over being told by everybody else what to do and how to be, and they were interested in. These were the early sort of stirrings in the late 40s for self-governing. The choral competition became a huge thing. Like the very first year, I think 1947, they had 2,000 participants, and choirs from all over the Gazelle and so forth. So Regina was part of that sort of early competition culture, and learning hymnody was not just about learning tunes or songs. It was a whole system. You learn to conduct, you learn to harmonise, as well, and you learn to arrange hymns, and you learn to adjudicate, to evaluate and judge. That makes me emotional too, because I'm pretty sure that's my friend Andrew Midian, and I'm pretty sure I recorded that in his house at Wunulul. Just after we'd eat, he'd just pick up a guitar. So he had a classical guitar and a steel string guitar as well. That's his classical. He taught himself to read music through books that he bought. First of all, through a guitar magazine that he bought at Rabaul newsagents back in sort of the 1970s or something like that, as a young man. Like totally just out of a written form, taught himself how to read, and then how to read guitar tablature, and then how to play. So people like Andrew learned to play just from the radio. They didn't own the recordings, they would just hear. Anytime that would come, they'd learn a bit more, and then a bit more, and a bit more. I didn't realise I had him playing classical guitar. That's brilliant.
I didn't know until I saw the... Actually, he was playing.
That's brilliant, man.
Yeah,
like
on the video.
On the video, so I took it up.
Video. We thought we didn't have it.
It's in the video, and that's what I said, oh, we put this on.
Introduced to me by Andrew Midian. Actually, he's a Duke of York Islander as well. By the time I met him, his voice was ruined. There's quite a few stories that he told me that are fascinating stories about his participation in competitions and his winning of competitions, and how his voice was ensorcelled by somebody because they were tired of his group winning. He woke up the night before a big competition in the 70s with blood coming out of his ear, and that's when he realised that someone had taken his babat out of his bag, his little sort of talisman that protected him out of his little betel nut bag. And if they lose their babat or their talisman that's protecting them, they're vulnerable to people doing things, malevolent things to them. And so someone had ensorcelled his voice, and his voice was perfect the day before, and gone on the day of the competition. And he said he never, from that day, he's never really sung properly. His voice was just hoarse. And that's also, that guitar part is part of a texture of guitars as well. There's a number of other guitars there. And I think I had him demonstrating to me different guitar tunings. He was, he played in something like 10 or 12 different guitar tunings, all with different names. It's like, they call them ki, like slap ki, like the Hawaiian style, they call them ki. Ki hoalu, so they call them Tahiti ki. Blue ki was another one, blue ki. 5 ki, F-A-I-V, 5 ki is another one.
Blue Mountain.
Blue Mountain is another one. Yeah, and he showed me that there's two ways of playing. There's picking, and there's rap, what they call rap. Rap ki, strumming, but rap, rough, or rub?
No. I think it's rap.
Yeah, rap ki.
Rap ki was a picking and the strumming.
And so what they would do is they'd finger a chord, and then they'd alter the tuning according to that chord, and so that's how you and then you could move your hand in certain positions, but you couldn't strum in that key because it was actually design was actually developed to pick too. And he came up with endless numbers of tuning.
Bigay tara kalil, una sorelong yaw tara tabaran, una surikim kala tara kokongiku. Mi bokko wa kuku, long sana long marum, mi kutu yara string, long irbirit natin, uyaw klasi brooks, piri brooks, springy brook, no bad magiti to bayaw.
Well, you'll see that this is a combination of languages.
He's mixing pidgin and
Tolai,
yeah.
That's why we're just laughing. Like it'll be Kono on one spot, go to Kono. So it's mixing up the languages. But anyway.
Nogat magit. Nogat magit ito payao. Remind me of the meaning of that.
All right. Nogat is no.
Yeah.
Magit is food.
So nogat is pigeon. Magit is quanoa.
Oh.
That's why we're just laughing because of the mixture. And
Ito
Word by
payao.
word.
yeah. So is quinoa, pigeon, payao means no food is well suited to me, or ito payao. So like just hearing the lyrics.
Nothing appeals. No food appeals to me.
Anyway.
Glassy Brook, Stringy Brook. I can't remember. This guy was absolutely hilarious. So he was in his late 70s when I met him. He was a legend. Man, he wrote so many songs, but
Interesting song about Kunai Dum Dum.
okay. So his famous ones. There's a famous one called Kunai Dum Dum, which there were these sort of colonial songs, sort of back from the colonial era, where a Toma policeman, either a friend or relative of his, was relating a story about how. So among Melanesians, there's a lot of self-deprecation, self-mocking about when they first encountered new kind of ideas. So these guys had all joined the police force and they couldn't march properly. So there was a guy in the police force who they're going lip right, lip right, and they're trying to teach them, and some are moving right, some are moving left, and they're all out of sync. So one of them comes up with this brilliant idea: there's two different kinds of grass. One called kunai, which is this blade grass, and there's one called dum dum. And dum dum is it's got sort of thick roots. Like when you pull it out, the kids chew on it to get water out of it. Yeah. And you tie that, and then you say kunai dum dum, and you learn how to march. And the entire Tolai police force and Manus police force learned how to march properly because of this. Of course, it's made up, but
but he composed the song on it, and everybody knows about this kunai dum dum, like learn how to march.
That's nice. I've forgotten about that. Tim Nanuk, Yeah, so Tim Nanuk, so Tim, the old word for a string band was Tim, T-I-M, or team, like a sports team. It comes from soccer or rugby. So that was before they called them a band. It was a team. Because that's the only way a bunch of guys would get together. They thought, team, it's the same as a sports team. It's hard from this distance to recall any details about this song.
Okay.
I'd have to go back into it, but what are they singing about?
All right, now you
Quanwa?
You notice the language? The language is not Quanwa.
Okay.
It's Samoan.
Okay. So what, is it a religious song? I don't think it is.
I'm assuming it is, but I can't tell.
Yeah, so the thing is, I can't, also, I'm a bit hazy on this, but would Nanuk, would Stanley Tokulapa be in this band?
Yeah, Stanley's in this one.
Okay, so his band originally, I can't remember the entire name, but they had something to do with Spiders. The Spiders string band, that was the original band. Now he was a guy who told me that, so he had songs from, and tunings and songs from Nauru, Nauruki, Tahiti, Samoa.
All right.
So sailors picked all these songs up too.
Okay. Well, there's two things I want to kind of comment on the string bands. One, this sort of tune or style is not played anymore. It's evolved into a current style of string bands these days. The modern contemporary string bands are totally different from what used to be played. And secondly, I listened into your interviews that they were the first string band of the Gazelle Peninsula, and I got a bit confused because I thought it was the Eagle voice. So they insist they were the first, so I don't know what your...
These guys could very well be, because if it's Stanley Tokulapa, I really trust and believe him. He's a very old man. When I interviewed him, he had a lot of old stories, and I think he must be on the money about that. And I think the Eagles, maybe they have a parallel history, but it's a different history, I think. It comes from a different kind of area. Just as Jack Thomas' style of playing is quite different over in the Duke of York's. Electric, is it?
Yeah. No, well, it's still called the Eagle voice, but...
Sounds like that the guitar's put through a radio or something like that.
Yeah.
Notice this is a lot more sort of cowboy influence. Yeah, it's like hillbilly style. This is influenced by the sort of Hank Williams and so forth recordings that were played on the radio. To me, this has got a bit of an influence of Central Province, Papuan style as well. Like they've obviously heard some. It still sounds Tolai to me, but obviously the language as well.
I agree with that. There's some external influence on this as compared to.
Yeah. So you've got you can sort of hear that the other one emerges kind of in a vacuum. Someone's been listening to records like sort of cowboy records and also the Central. It's got this sort of rhythmic lope of the Central style, but it does not to say that they're imitating. The influence could go back the other way as well. It could have been from Eagles to Moresby. And that could be at a rehearsal, but it also could be at Tumna Parau.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was a Tumna Parau.
Tumna Parau is this big reconciliation or a big sort of annual memorial ceremony that they have in the area where 4 Fijian pastor teachers were killed in 1878. So the band would go and pay tribute to the families and to the memory of the teachers. So this is like over 100 years later.
So who brought the instruments? Like how did the instruments?
David Crawley. Crawley was trained as a bassoonist in Britain, and he trained the bugle players of the colonial police. Sort of for the I think he went there in 1935. So he started training bugle players, and he goes, "You guys can play more than bugle. I could form a whole band here." So he asked the colonial officials, "Can I form a band?" And they said, "No, these guys are thick. You can't. You won't be able to teach them." And he wouldn't take no for an answer, so he purchased instruments himself. He trained the band in secrecy, sort of like the kunubak kind of idea, where in traditional music the performers all go and isolate themselves to purify themselves, to learn the dances and the tunes and get ready for performances. And it gives the performance sort of its magical aura as well. What's the young trip? Is it the young coconut?
Yeah, the young coconut.
Yeah, they spray that all over the dancers' faces before they go and dance.
You were asking about the powder?
Yeah, you could see that on one of the
I was
films,
just explaining to her that.
So trip is so that they drink it. It's sterile, and then they spray it like
they spray
the Tenabuai. He sprays that, but then they also, that's a magical thing that they spray.
That sounds like a magical.
Yeah, over the dancers, and it sort of a little bit gets into the crowd, and it creates this kind of aura, magical aura as well, that kind of attracts audiences, and so this is part of Kolemnemia, Spla Magic Way Oli Pulim.
Well, the word is for the females.
Not that, but just the general term.
The general, well, like gugu, meaning like you.
Yeah, that's gugu, but there's another word.
Yes.
Langoron.
Langoron.
You got it?
So the word is langoron.
That is real magical spells and the aura.
Yeah.
Langaron is,
The whole aesthetic combination of the performance that pulls you into it, and you can't pull yourself away. You're mesmerized.
That's the word. That's actually, you can see people collapsing, and like the influence of that special magical connection will make people. It stands out like
trance.
Trend, yeah. That's how
Feedback.
I think it was with David at the bass.
Is that kept us on bass? This is a recording.
Yeah.
This is like a studio recording.
No. I'll tell you what it is. Well, think of a ceremony in Rabaul.
Pacific Gold.
No, the Melanesian spearhead.
Okay, MSG.
Okay.
Wow.
It was hosted in Rabaul. And
Yeah, it was at Queen's
Park.
The
Queen's Park.
opening ceremony was at Queen's Park.
And it was Tolai playing.
Okay.
He didn't have the band in 1993. He didn't have a band yet.
Well, he'd already played with the Moab string band.
The Moab with the string band, but
this is electric band.
he's playing now in the electric band.
I didn't even know I had this recording, man.
It's on the video.
That's a live recording.
I took it out of the video. The this one of the collections and the Melanesian spearhead.
Yeah.
Rabaul.
Yeah.
And there are a series of dances plus the
That's
band.
a classic Telek voice.
Yeah.
Like young Telek voice.
He's a young
Yeah. That was when he was, just a rising pop star.
Yeah, he was rising that time. I remember you interviewing him down at the waterfront.
Yep.
Yeah,
He'd just come back. He'd come back from Melbourne. The first time he'd been to Melbourne.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And that the MSG was actually formed more or less by Melanesian countries. One of their big platforms was to liberate West Papua. So it has a really venerable history, that group.
Well, that's all the recordings.
That's good. Well, hope we got a selection of the music.
Wow, yeah. That's nostalgia for me, but it also, in a sense, it confirms the diversity and the kind of the creative breadth that was going on over a long period of time, which I hadn't quite heard of it all together and thought of it like that. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael Webb, for joining us on Toksave Culture Talks and sharing your amazing recordings and knowledge connecting my Tolai culture and heritage.
And thank you to our listeners for joining us. If you would like to listen to Michael's recordings, they are available as the MW6 collection in our online catalogue. For access and more information about PARADISEC, you can visit our website at www.paradisec.org.au.
Toksave Culture Talks was launched as part of the United Nations International Year of Indigenous Languages in 2019.
We would like to acknowledge the support of the University of Sydney Vice-Chancellor's Fund for the digitisation of Michael Webb's collection. We would also like to acknowledge the support of the Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence for the Dynamics of Language and the University of Sydney, the University of Melbourne and the Australian National University.